There is a profound misunderstanding in civilian life about how post-traumatic stress manifests. Hollywood loves the dramatic flashbacks, the sudden panic attacks at the sound of a backfiring exhaust, the weeping veteran huddled in a corner. But for many of us who carried rifles through the sandbox, the reality is far colder. It doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like a switch flipping in a dark, quiet room. It is the sudden, chilling recalibration of the brain from civilian mode back into the theater of war. When an aggressor crosses a fundamental line, they cease to be an annoying neighbor, a bad driver, or a rude manager. They become a hostile target, and the only acceptable outcome is their complete, methodical, and untraceable dismantling. For the past 3 years, my sanctuary had been the graveyard shift. A bad back and a zero-tolerance policy for corporate nonsense meant I thrived in isolation. I ran a specialized sanitation contract, deep cleaning commercial properties long after the fluorescent lights flickered off and the retail drones went home. We weren't talking about a light dusting or pushing a wet mop across linoleum. I hunted down the structural rot, the grease traps, the biohazards, the pest infestations. It was a filthy, unglamorous trade, but the margins were spectacular, and more importantly, it was quiet. Until a Tuesday in late October, when 2 compressed discs in my lower spine decided to ignite like a string of firecrackers. The pain was blinding, anchoring me to the living room floor. But contracts don't care about lumbar spasms. My wife, Miva, took one look at my pale, sweating face and grabbed my keycard lanyard. Alongside her mother, Cressida, and her sister, Ilara, she formed an impromptu sanitation squad to cover my route. Their target was a high-end pet supply and organic grain depot on the edge of the commercial district. I had drafted and distributed the cleaning schedule to the store's management 3 weeks in advance. It was supposed to be a straightforward 3-hour scrub down. 2 hours in, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Miva, and she was vibrating with a rare, crystalline fury. She explained that shortly after they had unlocked the rear service doors and begun setting up the industrial vacuums, the general manager had materialized from the front office. He was a bloated, red-faced tyrant who treated his authority over a retail pet store like a divine mandate. He had immediately started screaming at them, demanding to know why they were in his store, completely ignoring the brightly colored, laminated schedule taped to his own office door. When Miva calmly pointed out their contracted status, he pivoted, attempting to order them to perform his own staff's daily chores, taking out the register trash, wiping down the employee breakroom microwave. Miva, possessing a spine of pure tungsten, politely informed him that unless he wanted to renegotiate the vendor contract on the spot, they would be sticking to the agreed-upon deep clean. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Having worked the retail trenches in my youth, I knew the specific breed of incompetent middle management that thrived there. I chalked it up to a miserable man having a miserable night. I told Miva to ignore him, finish the job, and come home. 30 minutes later, she called back. The situation had degraded. As the store's closing shift, an entirely male crew of teenagers clocked out, the manager had followed them to the time clock, loudly lobbing gender-based insults to motivate them. Miva recounted his shrill, grating voice echoing through the stockroom, asking his cashiers if they needed to pause to apply their lipstick, or if their tampons needed changing before they swept the aisles. It was a vile, pathetic display of localized power, but legally, it was hearsay. I couldn't act on words overheard in a hallway. Then Miva delivered the final detail. After finishing their sweep, Miva and Ilara had walked out to the shared, poorly lit parking lot. From the shadows of the alley, they watched the manager march across the asphalt, walk directly up to my customized, heavily identifiable utility vehicle, and grip the driver's side door handle. He yanked it upward, aggressively trying the latch, peering through the tinted glass, hunting for a way inside. He didn't know them, he didn't know me, he thought he was untouchable. He thought he was in a vacuum, free to violate a stranger's property just to satisfy his own petty, vindictive curiosity. In the quiet of my living room, the pain in my spine vanished, swallowed entirely by a rush of sub-zero clarity. The switch had flipped. The next morning I poured a black coffee, sat at my kitchen island and dialed the store. I asked for the manager on duty. The voice that answered was aggressively chipper, introducing himself as Braxton. I kept my tone strictly professional, a flat, corporate cadence. I introduced myself as the vendor contractor and politely requested that he review the scheduling emails to avoid future friction with the cleaning crew. I also gently mentioned that my team had felt uncomfortable overhearing the locker room banter with his staff. framing it as a liability concern for him, not an accusation. For 30 seconds, Braxton played the role of a reasonable executive. Then I casually pivoted. "I also wanted to ask about the parking lot," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "My crew mentioned you were inspecting my vehicle after hours, trying the door handle." The atmosphere on the line instantly vaporized. Braxton's chipper facade shattered, replaced by a defensive, booming hostility. He began talking over me, his voice pitching upward, denying everything while simultaneously demanding to know who I thought I was to question him. He threw out bizarre, contradictory excuses. He was checking for unlocked cars to prevent theft. He thought it was his cousin's truck. Before I could dissect his lies, he slammed the phone down. I took a slow sip of coffee. I dialed back. "I want to know," I said the second he picked up, "what legal authority you possess to attempt entry into my vehicle." Braxton scoffed, a wet, arrogant sound. "I don't know what you're talking about, pal. You're delusional." "That's unfortunate," I replied, my voice dropping an octave, slipping into a dead, emotionless register. "Because your storefront shares a lot with the regional banking center next door. The lot is monitored by Argus Patrol Solutions. I know this because I clean the bank too. Their high-definition pan-tilt zoom cameras have a clear, unobstructed view of the loading zone. I'm going to request the footage through local law enforcement for attempted vehicular burglary." Silence hung heavy on the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as arrogance wrestled with sudden, suffocating panic. "I don't have to explain myself to a glorified janitor," Braxton snarled, his voice trembling slightly. He hung up again. I dialed a third, final time. "If we cannot resolve this professionally between us," I said to the dead air the moment the line connected, "I will be escalating this to your corporate oversight." "Fine. Go ahead, call me when you do," Braxton yelled, and the line went dead. Target locked. Rules of engagement established. 3 nights later, I returned to the store. My back was heavily medicated, strapped into a rigid brace, but my mind was operating with crystalline precision. I unlocked the rear service door with my authorized contractor key, disabled the internal alarm with my vendor code, and stepped into the suffocating smell of bulk cedar shavings and stale rodent urine. I wasn't there to break anything. Vandalism is the weapon of the amateur. I was there to conduct a thorough reconnaissance of enemy territory. I bypassed the retail floor and headed straight for the manager's office. It was a disaster zone of piled paperwork, half-eaten takeout containers, and towering stacks of vendor manifests. Braxton was a man drowning in his own incompetence. I put on a pair of black nitrile gloves and began systematically dissecting his filing cabinets. It took less than 20 minutes to find his handwritten incident report regarding our phone call. It was a masterpiece of fiction, a preemptive strike claiming I had threatened him with physical violence and demanded extortion money. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my cargo pocket. His narrative no longer existed. Deep in the second drawer, I struck the mother lode, a thick manila folder labeled Employee Disciplinary Actions. I opened it and found dozens of write-ups for the teenage staff. They were cited for absurd, microscopic infractions. "Shoes unlaced," smiled sarcastically, took a sip of water on the floor. It was a classic tactic utilized by weak, tyrannical managers, stockpiling fabricated ammunition against their own staff so that if anyone ever complained to HR, Braxton could immediately terminate them with a paper trail of insubordination. I took the entire folder. Poof, his insurance policy was gone. Beneath it lay a separate, dust-covered binder filled with legitimate customer complaints. Pages detailing expired products, rude interactions with Braxton, and concerns about store hygiene. I didn't steal this one. I laid the pages flat on the desk, pulled out my phone, and photographed every single document in high resolution. The physical infiltration was complete. The digital siege began the next morning. Over the following 2 weeks, I systematically dismantled the store's public reputation. Using a network of aged, credible-looking burner accounts I had cultivated over years of online gaming, I began dropping 1-star reviews on the store's Google business page. But a text review is easily dismissed. Photographic evidence is not. During my cleaning shifts, I had taken meticulously framed, brutally clear photos of the store's darker corners. I uploaded images of clustered black mouse droppings resting directly beneath torn bags of premium, organic puppy kibble. I posted photos of the toxic, heavy-duty floor strippers Braxton stored on the top shelf, precariously leaning over bins of loose birdseed. Let me assure you, nothing tanks a pet boutique's algorithm faster than the visual implication that their products will poison your golden retriever. The reviews caught the algorithm's attention. The local community Facebook pages began sharing them. Then, I escalated to the municipal level. I filed 2 anonymous complaints with the city health department regarding a massive, uncontrolled rodent infestation, attaching my high-definition portfolio of the droppings and chewed inventory. I ensured the photos sent to the city were entirely different from the ones posted online, preventing anyone from connecting the two campaigns. A day later, I filed a third complaint, this time with the regional branch of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. For this one, I didn't pose as a concerned citizen. I adopted the persona of a terrified, desperate teenage employee. I used the name of one of the actual cashiers I had seen on Braxton's schedule. In frantic pleading language, I detailed the safety hazards, the blocked fire exits, the improper storage of caustic chemicals, and the escalating mouse infestation. I explicitly begged OSHA to demand proof of a contracted exterminator, knowing full well from Braxton's budget files that he hadn't hired one in over 2 years. While the bureaucratic machinery slowly turned its grinding wheels toward Braxton's store, I engaged in psychological warfare. Braxton kept a leather-bound work journal on his desk, filled with his erratic, sprawling handwriting. Every night I cleaned the office, I opened the journal to pages he had already filled. In the tight margins, between his notes on inventory and payroll, I began drawing symbols. Using a pen that perfectly matched his own, I sketched intricate, slightly unsettling geometric patterns I remembered from a deployment in Kandahar. They weren't occult, they weren't satanic. They were just bizarre, precise, and completely out of place. I drew them small at first, then over a week I made them larger, more complex, weaving them into his own sentences. The goal wasn't to summon a demon. The goal was to make a highly stressed, sleep-deprived manager stare at his own notebook and wonder, with a creeping sense of dread, if his mind was beginning to fracture. I wanted him to question his own memory. I wanted him to feel hunted by his own shadow. The final strike was the decapitation maneuver. Taped to the wall behind Braxton's desk was a laminate sheet containing the corporate hierarchy. I noted the name and direct email address of the regional director, a woman named Sutton. I drafted an email from my official contractor business account. It was a masterpiece of cold corporate litigation. I detailed the severe lack of professionalism, the gender-based harassment my team had witnessed, and the blatant OSHA violations I had documented. I included the photographs of the chemicals stored over the pet food. Then I dropped the hammer. I detailed the incident with my vehicle, naming the security company that monitored the lot, implying that legal action was pending. I concluded the email with a strict ultimatum. If corporate could produce a written policy authorizing their retail management to forcibly search vendor vehicles without law enforcement present, I would retract my complaint. If they could not, I would immediately cancel the deep cleaning contract for their flagship store due to a hostile and unsafe working environment, and I would bill them a punitive cancellation fee for breach of vendor safety. I hit send at 8 a.m. on a Monday. I didn't hear a word back. I didn't expect to. Corporate entities operate like submarines. They run silent until the torpedoes hit. 3 weeks passed. I continued my late-night shifts, adjusting my schedule to arrive long after the last employee had locked the doors. But one evening, my curiosity overrode my caution. I arrived 30 minutes before closing. The atmosphere in the store was entirely unrecognizable. The suffocating tension that usually hung in the air was gone. The teenage employees weren't scurrying around like frightened mice. They were laughing behind the register, casually sweeping the aisles. The shelves were impeccably faced. The toxic chemicals had been relocated to a locked steel cabinet in the janitorial closet. The lingering smell of rodent urine had been completely eradicated, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of industrial enzymatic cleaners. I walked past the retail floor and glanced through the glass window of the manager's office. The towering piles of garbage and paperwork were gone. The desk was clean, organized, adorned with a small potted succulent. Sitting in the leather chair, typing peacefully on the computer, was a woman in her late 40s with a kind face and a neat cardigan. Her name tag read Linea General Manager. Braxton had been erased. I walked back out to my truck, the cool night air feeling exceptionally crisp in my lungs. I sat in the driver's seat, pulled a prepaid burner phone from my glove box, and typed out a single text message to the cell phone number I had pulled from Braxton's emergency contact file weeks ago. "Have you learned your lesson yet, Braxton? Or do I need to take your next job from you too?" I hit send, popped the battery out of the phone, and tossed both pieces into the commercial dumpster behind the bank. There is a profound peace in knowing you have excised a tumor from the world without ever picking up a scalpel. People like Braxton navigate life under the delusion that their petty tyranny exists in a bubble, that the strangers they abuse are simply NPCs in their own personal power fantasy. They rely on the social contract to protect them from retaliation. They rely on the assumption that you will play by the rules of polite society, even while they eagerly break them. But when you cross the wrong perimeter, when you mistake restraint for weakness, you invite a very different set of rules. The world is full of quiet, methodical people who have survived nightmares that arrogant men cannot even fathom. We do not yell, we do not posture. We observe, we calculate, and we dismantle. If you enjoyed this story of surgical administrative annihilation, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and let me know the most creative way you've ever seen a toxic manager get their karmic eviction notice. Until next time, keep your spaces clean, keep your boundaries secure, and never underestimate the quiet guy holding the mop.